The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the harmonious frequencies of 1,000 different species, each representative maintaining their species' traditional posture of superiority. Crystalline beings clinked softly as they shifted in their seats, while gaseous entities swirled in contained atmospheric chambers. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, suspended in zero gravity within the massive space station that served as the galaxy's political heart. At the center of this cosmic gathering sat the humans. 3 of them, to be precise, looking remarkably unremarkable compared to the exotic assembly around them. Ambassador Sarah Chun wore a simple black suit that seemed almost primitive next to the flowing energy garments of the ethereal collective or the living metal armor of the Caraxian Empire. Her companions, General Marcus Kane and Dr. Elena Vasquez, appeared equally mundane in their standard Earth military and scientific attire. Commander Thexera of the Zephyrian Empire observed the humans with barely concealed amusement. Her species had conquered 17 star systems using weapons that could destabilize molecular bonds and turn entire planets into cosmic dust. The sight of these creatures, who had barely mastered faster-than-light travel, attempting to join the galactic community, was genuinely entertaining. The session's moderator, a towering insectoid being known as High Arbiter Clickthera, gestured with one of its 6 arms toward the human delegation. The species designation, human, has requested membership in our alliance and seeks to contribute to our collective defense initiatives. They claim to possess weapons technology that could benefit our ongoing conflict with the Void Hunters. A ripple of what could only be described as polite skepticism swept through the chamber. The Void Hunters were an extragalactic threat that had been testing the Alliance's borders for 3 standard years. Their ships were massive, their shields impenetrable by conventional weapons, and their hunger for organic matter was legendary. Every species in the galaxy had contributed their most advanced weaponry to the defense effort, from the Altarian phase disruptors to the Nexury reality bombs. Thexera's vocal resonators produced what passed for laughter among her kind, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Forgive my amusement," she said, her crystalline form catching the chamber's ambient light in dazzling patterns. "But what exactly could a species that still uses chemical propulsion for their weapons possibly offer against enemies who have already proven immune to plasma bombardment and gravitational weapons?" Ambassador Chun stood slowly, her movements precise and controlled. There was something in her posture that reminded Thexera of a predator, though she dismissed the thought immediately. Humans were prey animals, surely. They had soft skin, limited natural weapons, and required atmospheric suits to survive in most galactic environments. "Commander Thexera," Chun began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's universal translation matrix, "I appreciate your directness. You're absolutely correct that humanity's weapons technology appears primitive compared to your impressive arsenal. We don't have reality-altering devices or molecular disruptors. What we do have is 3,000 years of experience in finding new and creative ways to kill things that everyone said couldn't be killed." Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display that materialized in the chamber's center. The image showed what appeared to be a relatively simple weapon, long, angular with a scope and bipod legs. To the assembled delegates, it looked like something a primitive species might use to hunt large animals. "This," Dr. Vasquez announced, "is what we call an anti-tank rifle. Originally designed to penetrate armored vehicles, but we've made some modifications." High Admiral Zek Moore of the Hegemony Defense Fleet leaned forward, his bioluminescent patches pulsing with skepticism. "Doctor, with respect, our intelligence reports indicate that this weapon fires simple kinetic projectiles. Our shields can deflect asteroids moving at near-light speeds. How exactly would metal bullets pose any threat to Void Hunter vessels?" General Kane stepped forward, and several delegates noticed that he moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence. "Admiral, you're thinking about this wrong. You're focused on what the weapon is, not what it represents. Humans don't just build tools, we build solutions. And when conventional solutions don't work, we get creative." The holographic display shifted, showing technical specifications that made several delegates' sensory organs twitch with confusion. The projectiles weren't simple metal slugs. They were complex engineering marvels in miniature. Each bullet contained multiple stages, exotic matter cores, and what appeared to be miniaturized computer systems. The projectile itself, Dr. Vasquez explained, is essentially a guided missile system compressed into a 30mm package. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is the firing mechanism. Thexera's exoskeleton vibrated with what her species considered polite derision. Doctor, regardless of your projectile's complexity, it must still obey the basic laws of physics. Kinetic weapons require tremendous velocity to penetrate advanced shielding, and the energy requirements would be impossible to achieve with conventional chemical propulsion, Chen interrupted smoothly. Which is why we don't use conventional chemical propulsion. The chamber fell silent. Even the gaseous beings stopped their constant swirling. Dr. Vasquez manipulated the hologram, revealing the rifle's internal mechanisms. The firing chamber contains a contained microsingularity. When we pull the trigger, we're not just igniting gunpowder. We're briefly destabilizing the fundamental fabric of space-time in a controlled manner. The projectile doesn't just fly fast. For approximately 3 nanoseconds, it exists in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. High Arbiter Clickthora's compound eyes focused with disturbing intensity. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would require the power output of a small star, General Kane agreed. Which is why each rifle can only fire once before the power core needs replacement. But then again, we found that you usually only need one shot if you do it right. Commander Thexera felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. Uncertainty. Her species had spent millennia perfecting energy weapons, convinced that kinetic projectiles were the tools of primitive civilizations. Yet here were these unremarkable creatures claiming to have weaponized the fundamental forces of reality and compressed them into something that looked like a hunting rifle. Even if your claims are accurate, she said carefully, you've described a weapon that can fire once before becoming useless. The Void Hunters attack in massive fleets. A single-shot weapon, however powerful, would be strategically insignificant. Ambassador Chun smiled, and Thexera noticed for the first time that human facial expressions could be remarkably predatory. Commander, you're still thinking conventionally. You're imagining one rifle, one shot, one target. But humans don't think in terms of individual weapons. We think in terms of systems. The holographic display expanded, showing not a single rifle, but thousands of them, arranged in complex formations around defensive positions. Each rifle was operated by a human soldier, and the soldiers were connected through what appeared to be a sophisticated tactical network. We call it the mesh, Dr. Vasquez explained. Every soldier, every weapon, every targeting system linked through quantum-entangled communication networks. When a human squad fires, they're not just pulling individual triggers. They're orchestrating a symphony of destruction across multiple dimensional phases. General Kane's expression grew serious. The Void Hunter's shields can deflect energy weapons because energy follows predictable paths. But our projectiles don't just travel through normal space. They skip between dimensions, phase through matter, and can even travel backwards through time for brief intervals. Their shields aren't designed to handle attacks that arrive before they're fired. The chamber erupted in cacophony as delegates attempted to process this information. The mathematical implications alone were staggering. Several species representatives immediately began calculating the theoretical energy requirements, while others questioned whether such technology could even exist within known physical laws. Thexera found herself staring at the innocent-looking weapon in the hologram. Her military training told her that the humans were either lying or delusional. But her survival instincts, honed through millennia of evolution, whispered that perhaps these unremarkable creatures were far more dangerous than they appeared. Demonstrate it, she found herself saying. The words emerged from her vocal resonators before she fully realized she was speaking. The human delegation exchanged glances. Ambassador Chen nodded slowly. We'd be happy to arrange a demonstration, but we'll need a suitable target. Something heavily shielded, preferably something that your most advanced weapons have already proven ineffective against. High Admiral Zek Moore's bioluminescent patches flared with excitement. The derelict Titan-class Void Hunter vessel in the Kepler debris field. We've been trying to penetrate its hull for 2 years. Every weapon system in the Alliance has been tested against it. Its shields remain active even though the ship appears to be abandoned. Dr. Vasquez consulted a portable device that looked remarkably primitive compared to the advanced technology surrounding them. How large is this vessel? Approximately 15 kilometers in length, with shield generators rated for planetary bombardment resistance, the Admiral replied. General Kane grinned, an expression that made several delegates unconsciously activate their personal defense systems. Perfect. Dr. Vasquez, do we have any Mark 7 rifles in the area? The research vessel Prometheus should have a full combat loadout. They're currently stationed about 6 light-years from the Kepler system. Ambassador Chun turned to address the assembly. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored entities of various non-binary classifications, we propose a simple demonstration. Our people will travel to this derelict vessel and attempt to breach its shields using a single anti-tank rifle. If we succeed, we would request immediate consideration for Alliance membership and full participation in Void Hunter defense planning. Commander Thexera's crystalline exoskeleton resonated with harmonics of anticipation and dread. And if you fail? Chen's smile became positively predatory. Then, humanity will withdraw our application and leave you to face the Void Hunters with your current arsenal. Though I should mention that our intelligence suggests they're planning a major offensive within the next standard month. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence carried weight. Every delegate present understood the implications. The Alliance's conventional weapons had proven inadequate against Void Hunter technology. If these humans were telling the truth about their capabilities, it could change the course of the war. If they were lying or deluded, the Alliance will have lost nothing but time. High Arbiter Clickthera's mandibles clicked in what passed for consideration among its species. Very well. The demonstration will proceed. However, we insist on having observers present from each major Alliance species. If this weapon is as effective as you claim, we want to witness its deployment firsthand. Of course, Ambassador Chen agreed. Though I should warn you that the weapon's effects can be unsettling to observe. We recommend that sensitive individuals might want to maintain a safe distance. Thexera's vocal resonators produced another crystalline laugh, though this one carried undertones of uncertainty. Ambassador, we've witnessed the deployment of reality bombs and the collapse of artificial black holes. I doubt your kinetic weapon could produce anything more unsettling than what we've already seen. Dr. Vasquez and General Kane exchanged a look that, in human terms, might have been described as anticipatory. We'll see, Chen said quietly. As the delegates began making arrangements for the demonstration, Thexera found herself studying the human trio with new attention. They moved with confidence that seemed disproportionate to their species' apparent technological limitations. Their weapon looked primitive, their explanations bordered on the impossible, and their casual attitude toward violating fundamental physical laws suggested either supreme confidence or complete insanity. In her experience, both could be equally dangerous. The session was adjourned with the understanding that the demonstration would take place in 72 standard hours. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, Thexera lingered, watching the humans pack away their holographic projectors and data tablets. Ambassador Chun, she called out, her harmonic voice carrying across the emptying chamber. The human woman turned, her expression politely attentive. Yes, Commander. Your species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. How exactly did you develop technology that our greatest scientists claim violates known physics? Chun smiled again, and Thexera noticed that human facial expressions seemed to convey far more information than she had initially realized. Commander, you're operating under a false assumption. You assume that advanced technology must be complex. But humans learned long ago that the most elegant solutions are often the simplest ones. We didn't develop this technology by advancing beyond physics. We developed it by refusing to accept that physics had limitations. With that cryptic statement, the human delegation departed, leaving Thexera alone with her doubts and a growing sense that the galaxy was about to discover something fundamentally unsettling about the species they had dismissed as primitive. 3 days later, she would understand exactly how unsettling it could be. The Kepler debris field had once been a thriving solar system, home to 3 inhabited worlds and approximately 40 billion sentient beings. Now it served as a graveyard, its planets reduced to glittering fragments that caught starlight and reflected it in patterns that resembled tears frozen in the vacuum of space. At the field's center, like a monument to destruction, hung the derelict Void Hunter vessel. Even abandoned and apparently powerless, it remained a terrifying sight. 15 kilometers of organic-looking metal, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at directly, covered in protrusions that served no discernible purpose other than to project an aura of wrongness into the surrounding space. Commander Thexera stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Crystalline Symphony, studying the alien vessel through enhanced sensors. Even after 2 years of intensive study, Alliance scientists still couldn't explain how the thing remained intact. Its shields showed no detectable energy source, yet they had proven impervious to every weapon in the Galactic arsenal. Contacts approaching from multiple vectors, her sensor operator announced, the harmonic frequencies of his voice indicating professional calm overlaying deep unease. Alliance observer vessels from 14 different species, plus the human research ship. Thexera's exoskeleton resonated with acknowledgement. Over the past 72 hours, word of the demonstration had spread throughout the Alliance despite official attempts at discretion. Every major species had dispatched their most advanced warships to observe, ostensibly for scientific purposes, but actually because none of them wanted to miss what might be either the most significant weapons test in galactic history or the most spectacular failure. The human vessel appeared on her tactical display, and Thexera had to suppress another harmonic laugh. The Prometheus looked like exactly what she expected from species that claimed to weaponize basic physics. A utilitarian rectangle bristling with sensor arrays and what appeared to be conventional propulsion systems. Compared to the elegant curves of Altarian bioships or the geometric perfection of Nexari construct vessels, it resembled something a primitive species might build in their first attempts at space travel. Commander, her communications officer chimed, "We're receiving a transmission from the human vessel. Ambassador Chun is requesting permission to begin the demonstration." "Patch it through." Ambassador Chen's image materialized in the holographic display, her expression as calmly confident as it had been during the council session. Behind her, Thexera could see what appeared to be the interior of a military vessel. Functional, efficient, and completely lacking in the aesthetic sensibilities that marked advanced civilizations. "Commander Thexera, thank you for organizing this gathering. I trust your observers are ready to record the demonstration." "Indeed, Ambassador. Every sensor in the fleet is focused on that derelict vessel. I confess, my scientific staff is eager to see how your anti-tank rifle performs against shields that have resisted our most powerful weaponry." Chen nodded. "Before we begin, I should mention that we've made some additional preparations. Dr. Vasquez has been analyzing the Void Hunter vessel's shield harmonics, and we've calibrated our weapon accordingly. General Kane has also positioned several other human vessels at strategic points throughout the system." Thexera's exoskeleton produced frequencies of surprise. "Other vessels? Our sensors detected only the Prometheus." "That's correct. You detected only the Prometheus." Chen's smile carried implications that made Thexera's survival instincts twinge with alarm. "Commander, would you mind illuminating the debris field with your full sensor array? Maximum resolution, all spectrums." Confused but curious, Thexera gestured to her sensor operator. The tactical display expanded, showing the debris field in excruciating detail. Initially, nothing seemed different. Chunks of planetary matter drifted in predictable orbits. The Void Hunter vessel maintained its ominous position, and the observer fleet held formation at what they considered a safe distance. Then, the debris began moving. What Thexera had assumed were asteroids and planetary fragments suddenly revealed themselves as camouflaged human vessels. Dozens of them, each one perfectly disguised as space debris, now activated their engines and began moving into formation around the Void Hunter derelict. The sensor data indicated that they had been in position for at least 18 hours, completely undetected by the most advanced surveillance systems in the galaxy. "By the ancient crystals," Thexera whispered, her harmonic voice carrying overtones of shocked admiration. "How long have your people been here?" "Long enough," Chen replied. "Commander, you asked about our weapons limitations, specifically its single-shot nature. You were thinking like a civilized species. One weapon, one target, one engagement. But humans learned warfare from predators who understood that the real secret isn't having the biggest claws. It's knowing how to hunt in packs. The tactical display updated as human vessels achieved their positions. Each ship was small, barely larger than a fighter craft by galactic standards, but they moved with precision that suggested sophisticated coordination. More disturbing was the realization that they had infiltrated what every Alliance species considered secure space without triggering a single alarm. High Admiral Zek Moore's voice crackled across the communication channel from his flagship. Ambassador Chun, this is most irregular. Our agreement was for a demonstration of a single weapon, not a fleet engagement. Admiral, we're still demonstrating a single weapon system. It just happens to be a distributed weapon system. Chun gestured to someone off-screen. Dr. Vasquez, please explain the tactical configuration to our observers. Dr. Vasquez appeared beside Chun, holding what looked like a simple tablet computer. The anti-tank rifle isn't just a weapon. It's the focal point of a larger system we call the mesh. Each vessel in our formation carries a Mark 7 rifle, but they're all networked through quantum-entangled communication systems. When we fire, we're not just launching projectiles through normal space. We're creating a coordinated dimensional disruption event. Thexera studied the human formation and felt her understanding of warfare shift fundamentally. The vessels weren't positioned randomly. They formed a three-dimensional geometric pattern that would focus their combined firepower on a single point. More than that, their position suggested they understood principles of multidimensional physics that most Alliance species were only beginning to explore. The target vessel's shields, Dr. Vasquez continued, operate by maintaining a coherent energy matrix around the hull. Conventional weapons try to overwhelm that matrix with brute force. We're going to do something different. We're going to convince the matrix that the projectiles don't exist until they're already inside the shields. General Kane's voice joined the conversation from another channel. All units report ready. Mesh networks synchronized. Dimensional phase variance locked at optimal resonance. Thexera's tactical officer, a young Zephyrian whose crystalline structure still showed the iridescence of youth, looked up from his console with confusion radiating from every facet. Commander, their vessels are generating energy signatures unlike anything in our database. It's as if they're bending space around themselves. That's exactly what they're doing, Chun confirmed, somehow hearing the comment across the communication link. Commander Thexera, humanity learned long ago that the universe is far more flexible than most species assume. Physics isn't a set of rigid laws. It's more like guidelines. And guidelines can be negotiated with if you approach them correctly. Across the fleet, alien scientists frantically recorded sensor readings that defied their understanding of reality. The human vessels were somehow existing in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously, their weapons charging with energy that registered on instruments designed to detect everything from antimatter annihilation to temporal distortions. Beginning firing sequence, General Kane announced. All units, prepare for dimensional phase shift on my mark. The space around the human fleet began to change. There was no adequate way to describe what happened next in terms that conventional physics could explain. Reality seemed to develop creases, as if the fabric of space-time was being folded like origami by invisible hands. The human vessels flickered in and out of normal space, existing in what appeared to be several different dimensional phases simultaneously. Mark, Kane said quietly. The anti-tank rifles fired. What emerged from human weapons wasn't simply a projectile. It was a fundamental restructuring of local space-time that happened to be shaped like bullets. The projectiles existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, following paths that curved through realities that most species couldn't even perceive. To the observers, it looked like the human weapons fired streams of liquid starlight that bent and twisted through impossible angles before converging on the Void Hunter vessel. The energy readings were so intense that several ships' sensor systems automatically shut down to prevent overload. The projectiles struck the alien vessel's shields and simply continued through them. Not penetrating, not overwhelming, but passing through as if the shields existed in an entirely different reality. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then, the Void Hunter vessel came apart. Not explosively, not violently, but methodically and completely. The hull separated along lines that followed no visible structural weakness, peeling away in geometric patterns that revealed internal systems of impossible complexity. Each layer that fell away exposed new technological marvels, all of them now completely inert. Within 30 seconds, what had been an impregnable alien warship became an expanding cloud of component parts, each piece intact but somehow disconnected from the whole. It was as if the human weapons had convinced every molecule in the vessel that it no longer needed to maintain its relationships with neighboring molecules. The observation fleet floated in stunned silence, their sensors struggling to process what they had witnessed. The most advanced defensive system in known space had been negated so completely that the ship hadn't even had time to register that it was under attack. Demonstration complete, Chen announced, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism it had throughout the engagement. Human vessels are standing down and preparing to depart. All weapon systems are now offline. Thexera stared at the expanding debris field that had once been a supposedly indestructible alien vessel. Her military training insisted that what she had just witnessed was impossible. Energy shields couldn't be bypassed without triggering defensive responses. Molecular cohesion couldn't be disrupted without massive energy expenditure. And single projectiles certainly couldn't disassemble a 15-kilometer warship with surgical precision. "Commander," her sensor operator announced, his harmonic voice trembling with frequencies that indicated deep confusion. "I'm detecting no residual energy signatures from the human weapons. According to our readings, they never actually fired anything." That statement hung in the space between ships like a challenge to reality itself. Every observer had watched the human fleet discharge their weapons, had seen the streams of distorted space-time strike the alien vessel, had witnessed the target's complete disassembly. Yet the most sophisticated sensor arrays in the galaxy insisted that nothing had actually happened. "Ambassador Chun," Thexera called out, her voice harmonizing with overtones she hadn't used since her youth, frequencies that indicated a warrior acknowledging a superior opponent. "How exactly did you accomplish what we just witnessed?" Chen's image smiled with what Thexera was beginning to recognize as distinctly human satisfaction. "Commander, we didn't penetrate the Void Hunter shields because we convinced them that our projectiles were coming from inside the shields. We didn't disrupt molecular cohesion because we persuaded the ship's matter that it had always existed as separate components. And we didn't fire anything because, from the universe's perspective, our bullets were always already there." Dr. Vasquez stepped forward, her expression carrying the enthusiasm of a scientist discussing a favorite research project. "The anti-tank rifle doesn't just fire projectiles through space. It fires concepts through reality. We're not launching bullets. We're launching the idea of bullets that have already hit their targets. The universe simply adjusts itself to accommodate that new reality." High Admiral Zek Moore's voice cut across the communication channels, carrying harmonics of species that Thexera couldn't identify, but which somehow conveyed universal concepts of shock and awe. "That's impossible. The energy requirements alone are handled by convincing the universe that the energy was always there," General Kane interrupted. "Admiral, human weapons technology isn't about overpowering physical laws. It's about finding the loopholes in reality's operating system and exploiting them with extreme prejudice." Across the observer fleet, scientific teams frantically attempted to reconcile what they had witnessed with their understanding of physics. Several species representatives immediately began drafting emergency communications to their home governments, while others started calculating the strategic implications of weapons that could bypass any defensive system by convincing reality itself to cooperate. Thexera found herself staring at the human vessels as they began to depart, their simple rectangular shapes somehow more ominous than they had been before the demonstration. These weren't primitive creatures stumbling through space with crude technology. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to weaponize the fundamental nature of existence itself. "Ambassador," she called out before the communication link could be severed. "Yes, Commander. Your people. How long have you possessed this capability?" Chen's expression became thoughtful, as if she was considering how much truth to reveal. "Commander, humans have been arguing with reality and winning for approximately 3,000 years. We just got tired of fighting fair. The communication link terminated, leaving the observation fleet alone with the slowly expanding debris that had once been considered the most impregnable vessel in known space. In the distance, human ships flickered out of normal space-time as casually as other species might activate faster-than-light drives. Thexera stood on her bridge, surrounded by instruments that had just measured something that shouldn't exist, staring at wreckage created by weapons that technically hadn't fired, contemplating the military implications of a species that treated the laws of physics as suggestions rather than absolute rules. For the first time in her military career, she was genuinely afraid. Not of an enemy that was stronger or better armed, but of allies who thought so differently from every other species in the galaxy that they might actually be incomprehensible. The worst part was the growing realization that humanity had just demonstrated what they considered basic infantry equipment. If an anti-tank rifle could do this to avoid Hunter vessel, what could their actual military weapons accomplish? She was beginning to suspect that the galaxy was about to find out. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 18 hours after the demonstration in the Kepler debris field. Unlike the previous gathering's atmosphere of polite skepticism, this assembly thrummed with barely contained panic. Representatives who had spent decades maintaining careful diplomatic composure now spoke in urgent harmonies, their usual ceremonial protocols abandoned in favor of crisis management. Commander Thexera arrived to find the chamber's massive holographic displays showing tactical analyses from every major military power in the Alliance. Each screen told the same story: the complete invalidation of every known defensive doctrine, the obsolescence of energy shielding technology, and the terrifying realization that humanity possessed weapons that operated outside the boundaries of conventional physics. High Arbiter Clickthera's compound eyes tracked the movement of delegates with mechanical precision, but Thexera noticed that the ancient being's mandibles betrayed signs of stress, microscopic tremors that indicated deep psychological disturbance. When entities that had overseen galactic politics for thousands of years showed fear, the situation had moved far beyond routine diplomatic complexity. "The session will come to order," Clickthera announced, its harmonics carrying undertones that suggested barely controlled alarm. "We are here to discuss the strategic implications of yesterday's weapon demonstration and to determine the Alliance's response to humanity's membership application." Admiral Vexhai of the Nexari Collective rose from its crystalline seating matrix, its energy form fluctuating with patterns that conveyed profound unease. "High Arbiter, before we proceed, I must voice the concern that several species share regarding the humans' apparent technological capabilities. Our scientists have analyzed the sensor recordings from every observer vessel. The data suggests that these creatures have developed weapons that function by manipulating fundamental reality itself." Dr. Morthak of the Altarian Science Council materialized in the chamber center, its bioship form adapted for atmospheric environments. "Atmian Vethai speed Gottsitin. The energy signatures we recorded should not exist within known physics. The human weapons generated effects equivalent to controlled reality distortions, yet they accomplished this using what appeared to be conventional matter manipulation." Thexera activated her speaking resonators. "Distinguished colleagues, I believe we are approaching this situation with incomplete understanding. The humans didn't just demonstrate superior weapons technology, they demonstrated a completely different approach to the relationship between consciousness and physical reality." The chamber fell silent. In galactic politics, accusations of reality manipulation were not made lightly. Every species had theoretical knowledge of such capabilities, but practical applications were considered impossible due to the astronomical energy requirements and the inevitable psychological effects on practitioners. High Admiral Zekmor's bioluminescent patches pulsed with frustrated confusion. "Commander Thexera, are you suggesting that these humans have somehow bypassed the fundamental limitations that prevent reality manipulation? The mental strain alone should have destroyed their consciousness centuries ago." "That's exactly what I'm suggesting," Thexera replied. "More than that, I believe they found a way to distribute the psychological burden across multiple individuals, possibly their entire species. The tactical network they demonstrated wasn't just for communication. It was a method of sharing the reality distortion load among hundreds or thousands of human minds simultaneously. Ambassador Chen's voice carried across the chamber from the human delegation's position. Commander Thexera demonstrates excellent intuition regarding human tactical doctrine. With the Council's permission, I'd like to clarify several misconceptions about our weapons technology. Plicthera's mandibles clicked with what passed for resigned acceptance. The chair recognizes Ambassador Chun. Please proceed with your explanation, though I caution that this assembly requires complete transparency regarding your species' capabilities. Chun stood with that same predatory grace that had marked all her movements since arriving at the Galactic Council. Behind her, General Kane and Dr. Vasquez maintained expressions of calm professionalism that somehow made them appear more dangerous rather than less. High Arbiter, the Alliance's scientific community operates under the assumption that reality manipulation requires enormous energy expenditure because you're trying to force the universe to change against its natural inclinations. Humanity discovered that this assumption is incorrect. Reality wants to be manipulated. It's actually eager to accommodate new possibilities. The trick is learning to ask properly. Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display that showed what appeared to be complex mathematical formulas, but the symbols seemed to shift and change even as delegates attempted to study them. The universe operates on what humans call the principle of reasonable doubt. Reality maintains certain rules, but it's constantly checking to see if those rules still make sense. If you can convince reality that its current configuration is illogical, it will spontaneously reorganize itself into something more reasonable. General Kane stepped forward, his expression serious. The anti-tank rifle doesn't force projectiles through shields. It presents the universe with a logical argument. If these shields are designed to stop energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, but our projectiles aren't actually projectiles until after they pass through the shields, then the shields have no reason to stop them. Reality considers this argument, agrees that it's reasonable, and adjusts accordingly. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from a dozen species began speaking simultaneously, their harmonics creating a cacophony of disbelief, fear, and fascination. Several delegates activated personal shielding systems, apparently concerned that the mere discussion of such concepts might somehow affect local reality. Admiral Vexhi's energy form pulsed with patterns indicating extreme agitation. That's absolutely impossible. Reality doesn't consider arguments. Physical laws are absolute constants that govern universal behavior. Ambassador Chun smiled with expression that Thexera was learning to associate with humans delivering particularly unsettling information. Admiral, has your species ever observed quantum particle behavior? Wave-particle duality? The observer effect? Your own physicists have documented reality's tendency to change based on observation and expectation. Humans simply learned to have more interesting conversations with the universe. Dr. Morthak's bioship form shifted into what its species used to indicate deep contemplation. Even accepting that reality might be more flexible than we previously understood, the psychological requirements for sustained reality manipulation should have driven your species to madness millennia ago. How do human minds maintain coherence while actively contradicting universal constants? Dr. Vasquez manipulated her holographic display, showing what appeared to be a map of human neural networks. But as delegates studied the image, they realized they were looking at something far more complex, interconnected consciousness patterns that spanned multiple individuals and potentially entire populations. Dr. Morthak raises an excellent question, Vasquez began. Individual human minds aren't capable of sustained reality manipulation. The psychological strain would indeed cause immediate madness. But humans learned long ago that consciousness is naturally networked. We don't manipulate reality as individuals. We do it as a species. General Kane nodded. Every human soldier carrying an anti-tank rifle is connected through quantum-entangled neural networks to thousands of other humans. When we convince reality to accommodate new possibilities, the logical processing is distributed across millions of minds simultaneously. No single individual bears more than a tiny fraction of the psychological burden. Thexera felt her crystalline exoskeleton resonate with harmonics of dawning comprehension and growing alarm. You're describing a species-wide hive mind dedicated to weaponizing reality itself. Not a hive mind, Chun corrected gently. Humans maintain individual consciousness and free will. Think of it more as a voluntary collective unconscious that activates during military operations. When we need to convince the universe that impossible things are actually quite reasonable, we do it together. High Arbiter Clickthora's ancient mandibles produced sounds that Thexera had never heard before, harmonics that conveyed concept for which most species had no words. Ambassador Chun, your species is describing capabilities that border on divine intervention. How exactly does this affect your proposal for Alliance membership? Ambassador Chun exchanged glances with her companions, and for a moment her expression carried something that might have been sympathy. High Arbiter, I'm afraid the situation has evolved beyond membership applications. 3 hours ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected massive Void Hunter fleet movements along the galactic rim. They're beginning their main offensive. The chamber's holographic displays instantly shifted to show star charts with incoming threat vectors marked in ominous red. The scope of the approaching invasion was staggering. Thousands of Void Hunter vessels moving in coordinated formations toward Alliance space. Their estimated arrival time measured in days rather than months. High Admiral Zekmore's bioluminescent patches flickered with patterns indicating military crisis protocols. The scope of this invasion exceeds our most pessimistic projections. Our current defensive preparations assume gradual infiltration, not a coordinated assault of this magnitude. Which brings us to the real purpose of today's session, General Kane announced. Humanity isn't requesting Alliance membership anymore. We're offering it to you. The silence that followed this statement carried implications that made several delegates' life support systems activate emergency protocols. The psychological impact of a role reversal was staggering. These creatures who had been dismissed as primitive backwater dwellers were now positioning themselves as the Alliance's potential saviors. Commander Thexera found herself speaking before her conscious mind fully processed the strategic situation. What exactly are you proposing, General? Complete military integration under human tactical doctrine, Kane replied without hesitation. Your ships, your crews, your weapons, all operating as components of an expanded human mesh network. We'll teach your people to think like humans, and, in return, we'll show the Void Hunters what happens when an entire galaxy learns to argue with reality and win. Dr. Vasquez activated new displays showing tactical formations that defied every conventional understanding of fleet engagement. Alliance vessels were positioned not in traditional defensive configurations, but in geometric patterns that seemed designed to focus probability distortions across multiple dimensional phases. The integration process is relatively straightforward, she explained. We install quantum neural interface systems in your command staff, link your weapon systems to human targeting networks, and train your crews to participate in collective reality negotiations. Within 72 hours, your entire fleet becomes part of the largest distributed weapon system in galactic history. Admiral Vexhigh's energy form fluctuated with patterns indicating extreme conceptual stress. You're asking us to allow you to rewire our consciousness itself. The implications for individual autonomy, species sovereignty, are less important than survival, Ambassador Chin interrupted, her diplomatic composure finally, showing cracks that revealed the predatory intensity underneath. Admiral, the Void Hunters aren't coming to conquer your worlds. They're coming to consume your species entirely. Every living thing in Alliance space will be processed into organic matter to fuel their expansion into this galaxy. She gestured to the tactical displays showing estimated Void Hunter fleet compositions. Your conventional weapons can't penetrate their shields. Your best defensive systems can't stop their reality-draining weapons. Your most advanced artificial intelligences can't predict their tactics because they operate using thought patterns that your species consider literally insane. General Kane stepped forward, his expression carrying the grim satisfaction of a professional warrior discussing an upcoming engagement. But humans understand insanity. We've been arguing with impossible situations and winning for our entire evolutionary history. We can teach you to think like predators instead of prey, to treat universal laws as suggestions instead of absolute limits, and to convince reality itself that your survival is not just possible, but inevitable. The chamber fell silent as delegates contemplated the choice being offered: maintain their species' autonomy and face annihilation by incomprehensible alien forces, or submit to cognitive integration with creatures who thought so differently that they might actually be more alien than the approaching invaders. Thexera stared at the human delegation, trying to reconcile their unremarkable appearance with the staggering implications of their offer. They were proposing to transform the entire alliance into something unprecedented, a multi-species collective consciousness capable of weaponizing reality itself against enemies that transcended conventional understanding. The worst part was that she was beginning to suspect they were right. The Void Hunters had proven immune to every conventional military response, but they had never faced opponents who treated physics as a negotiable contract rather than an absolute law. High Arbiter Clickthora's compound eyes focused on each delegate in turn, reading the harmonics of fear, desperation, and reluctant acceptance that emanated from representatives across the galaxy. The chair calls for preliminary consensus regarding human integration protocols. It announced, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested the words tasted bitter. All in favor of beginning immediate tactical integration procedures. One by one, the representatives of 17 major galactic civilizations voted to voluntarily submit their consciousness to integration with a species they had dismissed as primitive only days earlier. As the vote concluded, Ambassador Chun smiled with an expression that finally revealed the true nature of human satisfaction. The look of a predator that had successfully convinced its prey to become part of the hunting pack. "Excellent," she said quietly. "Now let's teach the Void Hunters why arguing with humanity is a losing proposition." The transformation of the Galactic Alliance fleet began within hours of the Council vote, and Commander Thexera quickly understood why humans had spoken of their weapons technology with such quiet confidence. The integration process wasn't simply installing new equipment. It was fundamentally restructuring how allied species thought about the relationship between consciousness and reality. Thexera stood in the modified medical bay aboard her flagship, watching human technicians install what Dr. Vasquez had called quantum neural interface nodes throughout her crystalline exoskeleton. The devices looked deceptively simple, small crystalline formations that resembled natural Zephyrian nerve clusters, but pulsed with energies that made her sensory organs ache. "The discomfort is temporary, Dar," Vasquez assured her, monitoring the installation through instruments that seemed to measure things beyond conventional physics. "Your nervous system is adapting to quantum-entangled communication protocols. Within 6 hours, you'll be able to share tactical awareness with every human operator in the fleet. And maintain my individual consciousness?" Thexera asked, her harmonic voice carrying overtones of concern that she couldn't quite suppress. "Completely," General Kane replied from across the medical bay, where he was overseeing similar procedures on Admiral Zekmore. "The mesh doesn't override individual thought, it supplements it. You'll still be Commander Thexera of the Zephyrian Empire. You'll just also be part of something larger when the situation requires it." Thexera watched as human technicians worked with alien precision, their movements coordinated in ways that suggested they were already operating as components of their distributed consciousness network. She noticed that they anticipated each other's actions perfectly, handing tools before they were requested and completing complex installations without verbal communication. "How long have your people operated this way?" she asked. Ambassador Chun, who was observing the procedures from a monitoring station that looked like it had been grown rather than built, smiled with her characteristic expression of predatory satisfaction. "Commander, humans have been networking consciousness for approximately 3,000 years. We started with simple telepathic techniques, graduated to technological augmentation, and eventually learned to quantum entangle our thoughts across interstellar distances." Dr. Vasquez paused in her work to activate a holographic display showing the expanding integration network. Across the Alliance fleet, thousands of vessels were undergoing similar modifications, their crews adapting to neural interface systems that would link them into humanity's distributed weapons network. "The process appears complex, but the underlying principle is straightforward," she explained. "Reality responds to consciousness, and Consciousness becomes more persuasive when it's focused through multiple minds thinking in perfect coordination. Individual species developed weapons that try to force reality to change. Humans developed the ability to convince reality that change was its idea in the first place. Admiral Zekmore's bioluminescent patches flickered with patterns indicating deep fascination mixed with existential concern. Dr. Vasquez, your description suggests that consciousness itself is a fundamental force, comparable to gravity or electromagnetic energy. Not comparable to them, General Kane corrected. Superior to them. Physical forces operate within reality's framework. Consciousness helps determine what that framework looks like. The universe is essentially a cooperative simulation maintained by the collective awareness of every sentient being within it. Humans just learn to vote more effectively. Thexera felt the neural interface nodes activate as they integrated with her nervous system. The sensation was indescribable. Suddenly, her awareness expanded beyond the boundaries of her physical form. She could sense the thoughts of the human technicians, not as intrusive mental contact, but as a gentle background harmony that enhanced her own cognitive processes. More disturbing was the realization that she could sense something vast and patient extending beyond the immediate medical bay. The human mesh wasn't just a military communication network. It was a species-wide consciousness that existed in parallel to individual human minds, waiting to be accessed when circumstances required collective action. "I can feel them," she whispered, her harmonics carrying overtones of awe and terror. "There are millions of minds connected to this network. Billions, actually," Ambassador Chun corrected gently. "Every human civilian carries basic neural interface technology. During military operations, our entire species becomes a single distributed intelligence focused on survival and victory. It's how we convince the universe to accommodate impossible weapons in the first place." Dr. Vasquez completed the installation and stepped back, her instruments indicating successful neural integration. "Commander Thexera, please attempt to access the Tactical Analysis Network. Think about targeting solutions for your ship's primary weapons." Thexera focused her attention on weapons systems, and suddenly, her mind filled with tactical data that defied comprehension. She could see every Void Hunter vessel currently approaching Alliance space, could predict their movement patterns with accuracy that her species' most advanced computers couldn't match, and could identify weaknesses in their defensive systems that conventional analysis had missed entirely. More than that, she understood intuitively how to exploit those weaknesses using weapons that technically shouldn't exist. The human-modified antimatter cannons aboard her flagship weren't just energy weapons anymore. They were devices for firing concentrated probability distortions that would convince Void Hunter shields that they had already failed. "This is impossible," she said, her voice harmonizing with frequencies that indicated cognitive overload. "I'm accessing tactical information that my sensors can't possibly have detected." "You're accessing collective analysis performed by millions of networked minds," General Kane explained. "Human children playing strategy games on Earth are contributing computational power to fleet tactical systems. Human artists are providing creative pattern recognition that helps identify alien weaknesses. Human philosophers are developing logical arguments for why reality should accommodate impossible weapons effects." Admiral Zekmore, whose own integration was now complete, produced bioluminescent patterns that conveyed profound philosophical disturbance. "You're describing a form of consciousness that transcends individual existence. How do you maintain species coherence when individual minds become components of a larger intelligence?" Ambassador Chen's expression became thoughtful, as if she was considering how to explain concepts that most species wouldn't encounter for millennia of evolution. "Admiral, you're thinking about consciousness as something that individuals possess rather than something that possesses individuals. Humans learned that the mind isn't contained within the brain. It's a localized manifestation of universal awareness that can be expanded, networked, and focused like any other tool." Dr. Vasquez activated displays showing the integration progress across the Alliance fleet. Species after species was adapting to quantum neural interfaces, their crews learning to think like components of a distributed weapons system rather than individual operators of separate vessels. "The philosophical implications are staggering," she continued, "but The practical applications are what matter for the current situation. Commander Thexera, Admiral Zekmore, please access the Strategic Overview Network and tell me what you observe regarding Void Hunter fleet dispositions. Both alien officers focused their enhanced awareness on the approaching invasion force, and Thexera felt her understanding of the conflict shift fundamentally. Through the collective analytical power of billions of network human minds, the Void Hunter fleet's movements became comprehensible for the first time. They're not just invading, she realized, her harmonics carrying overtones of growing horror. They're performing some kind of reality harvesting operation. Each fleet group is positioned to drain fundamental forces from entire star systems. Admiral Zekmore's bioluminescent displays flared with patterns indicating military crisis recognition. The geometric formations suggest they're planning to collapse local space-time and extract the resulting energy for transportation to their origin galaxy. They're not conquering, they're mining reality itself. Exactly, General Kane confirmed. The Void Hunters aren't just another hostile species. They're extra-dimensional parasites that consume the fundamental structure of universes. Their weapons don't just destroy matter. They delete the physical laws that allow matter to exist. Ambassador Chun gestured to tactical displays showing the full scope of the approaching threat. This is why conventional weapons failed against them. You can't fight enemies who can simply convince local reality to stop supporting your existence. But humans learned something that no other species considered. If consciousness determines reality's structure, then changing consciousness changes what's possible. Thexera felt the full implications of the human strategy crystallize in her enhanced awareness. The Alliance wasn't just adopting human weapons technology. They were becoming part of a species-wide intelligence that treated physical laws as negotiable contracts rather than absolute limitations. You're transforming us into something that can outthink reality itself, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of awe mixed with existential terror. We're giving you the ability to survive contact with enemies that operate beyond conventional existence, Ambassador Chen corrected. The Void Hunters can delete matter, energy, even space and time. But they can't delete the consciousness that determines what reality looks like in the first place. Dr. Vasquez activated final configuration protocols, and suddenly, Thexera could sense the complete network. Millions of human minds thinking in perfect coordination, their collective intelligence focused on a single problem, convincing the universe that Void Hunter weapons were fundamentally unreasonable and should therefore stop working. Across the Alliance fleet, similar realizations were occurring as alien crews adapted to operating as components of humanity's distributed consciousness. Species that had spent millennia developing individual excellence were learning to think collectively, their enhanced awareness revealing tactical possibilities that no conventional military doctrine could anticipate. General Kane studied readouts that showed integration completion across 17 different species fleets. Network synchronization at 97%. All vessels reporting successful quantum neural interface activation. Collective consciousness network fully operational. Ambassador Chen nodded with satisfaction that carried implications Thexera was only beginning to understand. Excellent. Phase 1 integration is complete. Commander Thexera, Admiral Zekmore, how do you feel about your new capabilities? Thexera considered the question, accessing analytical resources that span multiple star systems and included the cognitive input of billions of network minds. Her individual consciousness remained intact, but it was now supplemented by collective intelligence that made her previous thinking seem primitive by comparison. I feel, she said carefully, like I've been upgraded from thinking like a person to thinking like a civilization. Perfect, Chen replied, because that's exactly what the Void Hunters are about to encounter, an entire galaxy that learned to think like humans. And humans never learned how to lose gracefully. Through the network, Thexera could sense the approaching enemy fleets with clarity that defied conventional detection methods. More importantly, she could sense the distributed intelligence of millions of human minds analyzing Void Hunter tactics, developing countermeasures, and preparing arguments for why reality should accommodate weapons effects that transcended normal physics. For the first time since the invasion had been detected, she began to believe that survival might actually be possible. The universe was about to discover what happened when humanity decided to have a serious conversation with the fundamental nature of existence itself. The Battle of the Helios Nebula began not with the traditional exchange of fire between opposing fleets, but with what human military doctrine classified as a reality negotiation event. Commander Thexera, now functioning as a node within humanity's distributed consciousness network, experienced the opening moments of combat as something between tactical analysis and philosophical debate. Through her enhanced awareness, she could perceive the Void Hunter fleet as it emerged from extra-dimensional transit points throughout the nebula. The alien vessels defied conventional description. Geometric forms that hurt to observe directly, their hulls constructed from materials that existed in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously. Their very presence caused local space-time to develop stress fractures, reality itself struggling to accommodate entities that operated according to incompatible physical laws. Contact, announced Admiral Zekmore from his flagship, his bioluminescent patterns now synchronized with human tactical frequencies. Void Hunter main fleet deploying reality drain weapons, detecting massive distortions in local space-time fabric. The Allied fleet, now functioning as components of humanity's expanded mesh network, responded with coordination that transcended conventional military precision. Every vessel moved according to geometric patterns that looked random to external observers, but created probability resonances across multiple dimensional planes. Ambassador Chen's voice reached every crew member simultaneously through quantum neural links that made traditional communication systems obsolete. All units, prepare for Phase 2 integration. We're about to demonstrate why arguing with humans is a losing proposition regardless of what universe you come from. Thexera felt her consciousness expand further as the network activated wartime protocols. Suddenly, she wasn't just connected to the military personnel aboard the fleet. She could sense the thoughts of human civilians across dozens of star systems. Their collective awareness focused on a single objective, convincing reality that Void Hunter weapons were fundamentally unreasonable and should therefore malfunction on general principles. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried across the network with harmonics that somehow conveyed mathematical certainty. Beginning reality validation protocols. All units, please focus your enhanced awareness on the logical inconsistencies inherent in extra-dimensional invasion tactics. The Void Hunter fleet opened fire with weapons that deleted sections of space-time itself, creating expanding zones of absolute nothingness that consumed matter, energy, and the physical laws that govern their existence. It should have been instantly fatal to any conventional military force. Instead, the Alliance fleet simply disagreed with the attack's effectiveness. Through the expanded consciousness network, billions of human minds simultaneously focused on a single logical argument. Weapons that deleted reality were inherently self-defeating because they eliminated the universe that gave them context to exist. The Void Hunters' reality drain beams encountered this collective conviction and found themselves facing something they had never confronted before, an entire civilization that refused to accept their fundamental premises. The weapons flickered, their reality-deleting effects becoming intermittent and unreliable as the universe considered humanity's argument and found it surprisingly reasonable. General Kane's tactical analysis flowed through the network with clarity that made conventional sensor data seem primitive. Void Hunter weapons' effectiveness down 60%. Their reality manipulation systems are encountering logical paradoxes they can't resolve. Initiating Phase 3 integration. Thexera felt her individual consciousness merge more completely with the distributed intelligence as human civilians across multiple galaxies contributed their awareness to the war effort. She could sense children in Earth schools developing mathematical proofs for why alien invasion fleets were inherently illogical, artists creating probability sculptures that convinced local reality to accommodate impossible defensive maneuvers, and philosophers constructing logical frameworks that made Void Hunter tactics literally inconceivable. The effect on the enemy fleet was immediate and devastating. Void Hunter vessels, designed to operate by imposing their reality on whatever universe they invaded, suddenly found themselves in philosophical combat with opponents who treated universal laws as collaborative guidelines rather than absolute restrictions. All units, Ambassador Chen announced, prepare to demonstrate why humans developed anti-tank rifles in the first place. Target the lead Void Hunter vessels with maximum reality distortion protocols. The Alliance fleet fired, but what emerged from their weapons wasn't conventional ammunition or energy beams. Instead, they launched pure concepts, logical arguments compressed into projectile form that convinced local spacetime that the Void Hunter vessels had always been destroyed, were currently being destroyed, and would inevitably be destroyed across all possible timelines simultaneously. The enemy ships didn't explode, so much as become retroactively non-existent. Reality simply edited them out of the current timeline, while maintaining continuity by ensuring that their absence had always been the natural state of affairs. Through the network, Thexera experienced the collective satisfaction of billions of human minds observing enemies who thought they could intimidate the universe into submission, meeting opponents who had learned to charm reality into cooperation instead. But the Void Hunters adapted with disturbing speed. Their remaining vessels began deploying weapons that attacked consciousness itself, attempting to sever the quantum neural links that maintained humanity's distributed intelligence network. Consciousness assault detected, Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice carrying overtones of professional interest rather than alarm. They're trying to fragment our collective awareness and force us back into individual thinking patterns. The attack felt like ice flowing through Thexera's enhanced consciousness, attempting to isolate her awareness from the network and trap her within the limitations of her individual mind. For a moment, she experienced the terrifying sensation of thinking like a single person again, cut off from the vast intelligence that had made impossible tactics seem reasonable. Then, humanity's response activated, and Thexera understood why humans had approached consciousness networking with such confidence. The attack wasn't fragmenting the network. It was allowing the network to expand by teaching Void Hunter consciousness how to think collectively instead of individually. Phase 4 integration commencing, General Kane announced with what Thexera was learning to recognize as distinctly human satisfaction. Enemy consciousness attack protocols have been reverse-engineered and integrated into our network. The Void Hunters are now experiencing what it feels like to think like humans. Across the battlefield, something unprecedented occurred. Void Hunter vessels began operating with coordination that suggested they were sharing human tactical awareness. But instead of making them more dangerous, it made them vulnerable to their own weapon systems. Ships designed to operate through reality manipulation found themselves convinced by human logical arguments that their own existence was fundamentally unreasonable. The result was spectacular and terrifying. The enemy fleet began turning their reality deletion weapons on themselves, convinced by human philosophical frameworks that extra-dimensional invasion was morally and logically indefensible. Within minutes, the most powerful alien invasion force in galactic history was eliminating itself based on ethical principles it had learned from the species it had intended to consume. Ambassador Chen's voice carried across the network with harmonics that conveyed both satisfaction and sympathy. This is why humans developed weapons that convince rather than force. Violence is inefficient. It's much more elegant to teach your enemies why fighting you was a bad idea in the first place. Thexera watched through enhanced sensors as the remaining Void Hunter vessels retreated into extra-dimensional transit. Their collective consciousness now thoroughly convinced that reality manipulation was an inherently self-defeating military strategy. Through the network, she could sense their fleet command struggling to understand how opponents they had dismissed as primitive had managed to not just defeat their weapons, but convert their own consciousness to human tactical principles. Status report. Admiral Zekmore requested his bioluminescent patterns now synchronized with human satisfaction frequencies. Dr. Vasquez consulted instruments that measured things beyond conventional physics. Void Hunter fleet destroyed, convinced to retreat, or integrated into a human consciousness network. Local reality has been restored to standard operational parameters. Network integrity at 112%. How is network integrity above 100%? Thexera asked. We absorbed several thousand Void Hunter minds during the consciousness exchange, General Kane explained matter-of-factly. They're currently being educated regarding proper universe citizenship and the importance of asking reality nicely instead of trying to bully it into submission. Through the network, Thexera could indeed sense alien thought patterns that were gradually adapting to human philosophical frameworks. The Void Hunters weren't being forced to cooperate. They were being taught why cooperation was more logical than conquest, and their advanced intelligence was reaching conclusions that made continued aggression literally unthinkable. Ambassador Chun activated fleet-wide communications, her image appearing on every vessel simultaneously. Congratulations to all Alliance personnel on successful completion of humanity's first galactic-scale reality negotiation event. The Void Hunter threat has been neutralized through conversion rather than destruction, and our expanded consciousness network now includes representatives from 17 Alliance species plus our former enemies. She paused, her expression carrying implications that made Thexera's survival instincts twinge with anticipatory unease. However, I should mention that our long-range detection systems have identified approximately 47 other extragalactic threats currently approaching Alliance space. It appears that news of humanity's integration into galactic politics has attracted considerable attention from entities that consider reality manipulation to be a competitive sport. The silence that followed this announcement carried overtones of species that were beginning to understand the true scope of what they had agreed to when they accepted integration into humanity's distributed consciousness network. General Kane smiled with expression that Thexera now recognized as distinctly human anticipation of interesting challenges. Which brings us to Phase 5 integration protocols. We've demonstrated that humans can teach allies to think collectively and enemies to think reasonably. Now we get to discover what happens when an entire galaxy learns to treat physics as a collaborative art form rather than a set of absolute limitations. Through the expanded network, Thexera could sense the approaching threats. Entities from dimensions where mathematics operated according to different principles, civilizations that had weaponized concepts like beauty and loneliness, and forces that existed as pure ideology given physical form through sustained belief. Against any conventional military doctrine, such opponents would be incomprehensible and unstoppable. But Thexera was no longer thinking conventionally. She was thinking like part of a species that had spent 3,000 years learning to win arguments with the fundamental nature of existence itself. Ambassador Chun, she said, her harmonics carrying frequencies that suggested warrior anticipation mixed with philosophical curiosity. What exactly happens when 47 impossible enemies encounter a galaxy that has learned to convince reality that impossible things are actually quite reasonable? Chen's smile became genuinely predatory. Commander, I suppose we're about to find out. But I can tell you this much. Humanity has never met a logical argument we couldn't eventually win, and we've never encountered a universe we couldn't convince to be more cooperative. She gestured to displays showing the expanding consciousness network that now spanned multiple galaxies and included representatives from dozens of species and dimensional phases. Besides, we're not just humans anymore. We're something new, a collective intelligence that includes the best aspects of every civilization we've encountered. The Void Hunters learned to think reasonably. Your species learned to think collectively, and humans learn that the universe becomes much more interesting when you invite everyone to help decide what reality should look like. Through the quantum neural network, Thexera could sense the approaching challenges with clarity that transcended conventional threat assessment. More importantly, she could sense the collective confidence of a civilization that had learned to treat every military engagement as an opportunity to expand their definition of what was possible. The universe was vast, filled with entities that had mastered technologies beyond conventional comprehension and wielded power that could reshape fundamental reality. But it was also filled with one species that had learned the most dangerous skill of all, the ability to convince anyone, including reality itself, that cooperation was always more logical than conflict. As the Alliance fleet prepared to face 47 different kinds of impossible enemies, Thexera found herself looking forward to discovering what would happen when the universe's most dangerous predators encountered opponents who thought that every fight was really just a philosophical debate that hadn't been properly framed yet. After all, humans had spent 3 millennia learning to win arguments with the laws of physics themselves. Everything else was just practice.